Go. Hello, and welcome to Trek Prime, episode 34. Usually on weeks that Jeff picks a subject, he picks a Star Trek movie. This week, for reasons I'll get into a little later, I decided to kind of hurry one along. So tonight, we're going to talk about Star Trek First Contact. This is the movie that came after Generations. And as you pointed out in the last week's Generations podcast, there was no particular assurance we'd even be getting another Next Generation movie at all, was there?
Didn't feel like that there was going to be one, yeah.
I mean, I don't remember. I mean, you and I were both kind of involved in the magazine culture. I mean, online was still, there wasn't much going on. So, I mean, there were BBSs and stuff like that, but I don't know if, I wasn't online then. I don't know if you were online in 95. But I really, in the press, there was nothing about, there's going to be another Next Generation movie for sure. There was no assurances at all. I had no idea what was going to happen with the Trek movies.
Yeah.
I really didn't know. So, all of a sudden, it seemed like out of the blue, was it 96 or something like that, early 96?
Mm-hmm.
I started seeing this stuff about there was a new movie, there was going to be a new Enterprise, and other things. And I mentioned this a little bit last week. I seem to remember it was right exactly in the time I first met you. Right around that time, like January, February 96, I don't know. Your memory may not have a good notion of that time, but yeah. And, okay, so, it may be stalling here for me to say this, but I want to talk about that new Enterprise for a minute. We've had different conversations about that, because, we knew at the end of Generations there was going to be no more Enterprise D. Picard kind of ended it by saying there'll be another Star Trek named Enterprise. So, you figured there'd be another one, So what we got was this, the Enterprise E. And this is, of course, the best representation of it I personally have access to. This is the Diamond Select model. And, Playmates put out a Model 2 at the time, but it didn't look like this. We discussed that in the Star Trek toy model. Okay, so this is the top, and it's a Sovereign-class starship. This is the bottom of it. And this lights up this model, but I can't light it up. But it's a good representation of what this ship is. So I wanted to talk about this ship with you a little bit, but I wanted to show all of you out there. Just, of course, you've probably seen this a billion times over the years. It's not a new ship. It's about 23 years old at this point, but this is it. So this is the best representation. So keeping this in your mind, we're going to talk about this ship here. So just for a minute. So basically, we do not see this as the first thing in the movie, okay? I didn't really hear about the movie being about the Borg at first. I don't know if you heard anything about it. That kind of came later, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the news about it just came into the magazines, and at least the one that I read had said something about there being a Borg arc in the story and time travel. And
yeah, I kind of read hints. I didn't really hear anything specific about it. It kind of developed later on.
Yeah.
I didn't really hear about it until the fall of 96, so it was kind of like just a weird thing. But I did know one thing. Voyager, around that time, they were trying to bring the Borg in more as an active situation during, season 3 of toward the fall of 96. They were kind of trying to bring in the Borg as more of a situation. So I kind of knew that was the focus that we're going to go on with the Borg. But back to the Enterprise E. I knew you when that happened, and I wish I remembered more of our conversation about it. But do you think we can kind of replicate some of our first observations where I know it's hard to say this, but I want to get this through my head correctly. I seem to remember you told me, because you'd seen some magazines or some books with images of it, and you said that it was closer to the Excelsior class. And I wanted to elaborate a little bit on some of your ideas about the Sovereign class and its specific design.
Yeah, well, it just reminded me of that because of the long nacelles. And, the way the secondary hull sort of has that same kind of a shape, but just extends a little bit. Yeah.
Look, it had rounds up here, and the nacelles are about half the ship. So
yeah, and it just kind of felt like a step back in the design lineage of the Enterprise. Basically, they're trying to like going back to basics with the ship. Making it more military and look.
Yeah, I've been watching some YouTube videos by a number of people, and here's the skinny of the Enterprise E that I just get. And I mean, we could do his character sketch later if you wanted to. But basically, that it was kind of the manifestation of, okay, the Federation built the Galaxy class ship to bring families on board, that there was some notion of that not working because, the Borg was basically carving the ship up. And they wanted a ship that could kind of handle it. So they built this, which was more of a, I wouldn't say a battleship, but more of a fortress. I mean, I get the impression this ship was capable of exploration as well as any other ship.
Yeah.
That it had best sensors. And at some point early in the movie, which kind of just got my attention pretty quickly, I hadn't really seen the movie much yet, Geordi looked right at Picard and said, "This is the most advanced ship in Starfleet." Which I had a little bit of a problem with. I don't know if you can kind of figure out why that was.
Well, the reason I think it is because there was a tech manual that came out with when Next Generation started on television, and it was breaking down the Enterprise D, and they had said in the book that the Enterprise D had a life expectancy of usefulness for about 80 years. So apparently the Galaxy class ship was supposed to exist for at least a century before the ship would be considered unusable. And the Galaxy class ship was created with space that was not used inside the saucer section because that was supposed to be set aside for upgrades later on down the road when the ship would have to be modified. So the ship would be constantly updated as time went on, making the Galaxy class always the top of the line starship in the Federation because it was designed to be that way for a long period of time. So when the Sovereign class came out and Geordi made that remark, I thought that was a little bit awkward because as Galaxy class starships are, I mean, they would have the same equipment that the Sovereign class would have installed on their ships. Basically,
That's why I wondered if a lot of these theories are true, that the Galaxy class was rendered kind of unfit for the threats of the Borg, for the threats of the Dominion. And in that sense, the Sovereign class Enterprise was considered much better armored, much better protected, much more capable of leading the missions that...
Well, they were still using the Galaxy class during...
I know they had them all through Deep Space Nine. You could see that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like they put it out to pasture. I mean,
no, they were still in their run, and they were just doing updates for them, like you said. They were adapting them and changing them, and there were little subtle things, but they were still kind of using those kind of ships. So, the Sovereign class ship, I just think, I don't know. I mean, Geordi's the engineer. The funny thing is, of all the movies, there were 3 movies that used this ship. We really don't know a whole lot about it.
No, we don't. No.
I mean, I don't even know how many people this actually holds. I can guess as fan guesses, but there's even controversy within canon about how many decks it has, which we'll get into when we talk about this movie. And, it's funny, now that I think about it, just the events of this week, is it me or the more you go down in Star Trek, is one of the key defining elements of Star Trek tend to be a certain level of discontinuity. From one series to the other, there are often things that contradict each other. And oftentimes we end up being here discussing them, and a number of other fans, too.
It's just more difficult when you start a movie with a brand new ship that you've never seen before and they're already contradicting themselves in the very first movie.
So, like I said, they have a discontinuity right there. But like I said, if you look back, it just ends up happening. So, okay, first contact, you begin with Picard's face, basically. The theme song, again, this is a syndrome after Star Trek 6. The theme songs are kind of meh. There's nothing really, I don't remember the theme song.
Well, the thing about this one is that it didn't really start with the traditional theme song, although they put it at the end of the movie. What they started off with was just kind of a big instrumental sort of that led up to...
Like I said, like 6, like Generations, it didn't have a theme song. It had kind of just this scoring element.
Yeah.
In the beginning. I don't know why they stopped doing the theme songs after 5. That's weird. Why they...
I don't know. I mean, like I said, they tacked it on at the end credits of the movie.
Yeah, again, this joke may be getting as tired as our little detector circuit thing, but, well, I don't think that's tired, but people might think it is. But, First Contact, I just have my vision of it beginning with those little bells, like ding, 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 ding. It just wouldn't seem like it belongs with the little bells and the stuff that Star Trek 4. That would be a weird thing to put in a movie like this. And I remember the kind of credits were kind of bleeding into the background a little bit.
Yeah, they kind of out of focus and they focused, It's
very mid-90s. I mean, just looking at it now, it looks very much of its time.
Yeah.
I mean, as of its time as everything being see-through. Remember, you get the IMAX and the phones you could see through. Everything in the late 80s, mid 90s was see-through everything.
Yeah.
I'm surprised this movie didn't have see-through vision or something. Everything that beginning was so traditionally mid 90s. It was just, sometimes, Star Trek, the age of it kind of blends in a good way. Like with a motion picture, my friend Henry, called that space disco, which it kind of is. But that worked because they integrated it in very well. This movie, on the other hand, is a very different story. So, okay, we go from this theme song and we see a picture of Picard's face kind of zooming out. And then we see Picard as he appeared in the third season of TNG in this giant Borg cubicle thing, this humongous thing.
What I call, it looked like an hourglass inside of a Borg cube.
Right, it was like this big kaleidoscopy hourglass thing, because it was all shaped like that.
Yeah.
And that hourglass, like there was gonna be little sand coming down. Like maybe Wicked Witch could come out and say, "You're gonna get assimilated, Picard, and it isn't long." It isn't long, it's like you saw the Wicked Witch of the West to appear and turn over the hourglass on Picard.
Yeah.
You get the idea in this first scene that this is when the Borg are. And here's the thing about this: I never understood him as actually being assimilated. I understood as him being altered. Because he wasn't fully assimilated. He was Locutus of Borg. He wasn't 7 of 4 or whatever, or 4 of 7. He wasn't some Borg designation. So I don't think they really fully assimilated him. I don't know, but it was like they retained some of Picard. So when you saw this, so obviously Picard is woken up out of this. You see the Enterprise E at this point, and apparently it's a very, very new ship. Because the Borg have attacked Sector 001. Okay. And, I think it was Crusher who mentioned the ship didn't have enough shakedown time.
Well, I guess they had it for about a year before we see it in that movie. So I guess that was...
I haven't really honestly seen it.
Yeah, just about a year, I suppose.
So she said there hadn't been enough shakedown time, so it wasn't exactly an old ship.
No, they just got it, basically. But the funny part of the beginning was that they show the Enterprise flying around near the neutral zone while Earth is under attack, and we find out through Picard that Starfleet doesn't want them there because they don't trust him. And I thought that was another kind of like a whoa.
Yeah, well, that gets kind of deeper. Well, go on. I have something.
And I was like, how many times did Picard encounter the Borg after Best of Both Worlds, and Starfleet didn't have a problem with it then? Now all of a sudden, no, we don't want you here. Earth is under attack, and even though that they had the same crew basically that stopped them the last time, no, we don't want you here. You stay out of it. And I'm like, that. It's like maybe they had a change of staff in that time when they have a different admiral running Starfleet, and this admiral was probably one of the captains who fought in Wolf 359 or one of the survivors or something like that, and he has this prejudice against Picard, and that was the only thing I could think of to explain why they didn't want him involved.
Even in Generations, or even before that, and we mentioned this in the Generations review, the Enterprise just happened to be the first ship on the line.
Yeah,
it was always like, okay, well, even if the Enterprise is falling apart, or like in Generations, if the Enterprise B isn't ready till Tuesday.
Yeah,
it's the Enterprise, so that's the first ship we got to send out. So that was always the ultimate hero ship, that they just would send it out even if it was falling apart and little pieces were flying off the hull. It's like, send the Enterprise out. It's the Enterprise, so it's going to be fine. Yeah. So this ship, all of a sudden, we don't want to send him out there.
Yeah.
Even though the ship is more than capable, but inevitably they do. And okay, I'm going to talk about a little something else. We discussed this in our uniform thing, and what we're talking about. The outfits. Actually, maybe we should discuss that later, because that goes into issues of the preview, which I want to discuss in a little bit after we finish talking about the movie, because, they changed uniforms. And one thing I noticed about the Enterprise E, now, I know Nicholas Meyer did not direct this movie, but I was just surprised at how utterly dark the whole ship was. Really dark. I mean, the stuff on the bridge was all dark, Is it me, or in Star Trek movies is there this interest in darkening up everything?
I don't know. I mean, because Frakes, when I mean, he was on Next Generation, the TV show and stuff like that, and I don't know why he thought that going dark with First Contact was really the way to go with the ship. I mean, I didn't really see it as such a like a big noticeable thing until later on in the movie when they were actually fighting the Borg on the ship, and everywhere they went was dark.
Well, Generations is a little darker, but again, you saw light streaming in every room.
Yeah.
With the Enterprise, DE, it always looked like they were kind of getting ready to go to bed.
Yeah.
The lights were all kind of muted, and I don't know. Okay, so what happens is they fight this Borg cube. And, one thing about the Borg in this movie that I want to get straight away. I realize in movies they always kind of drum things up, but they kind of change the physicality of the Borg and their ships a lot in this movie. I mean, this may be spoiling it. Now, for one thing, is it me? Or do the Borg look less like enhanced human beings and more like horror movie ghouls in this?
Well, yeah, they got rid of some of the ways they made the Borg in this TV show because now they had the money to actually do the Borg and do it right.
But what they did is they kind of transformed them into more ghoulish zombie-like creatures rather than androids with enhancements.
Yeah.
And they came off more horrifying.
Yeah, which I think was a better way to approach the Borg, because the TV show, obviously, they were limited by money and how much they could do it. So basically what they did with the TV show was they just had them wear this black long piece thing and they just tacked stuff on it, but with the movie, they were actually able to do much better work to make it actually look like cybernetic system, not just a robot with stuff on it,
Like zombies to me, but anyway, they just, I don't know, they just came off zombie-like.
Yeah.
But, so, okay. Another thing about the Borg was that in this movie, and I think we both talked about this too, it was understood in the Next Generation, Q had kind of brought this up, that the Borg were a collective race who had no individual identity, but that single identity they had was not a personification. It was like some sort of mass consciousness, like a computer or some sort of mass consciousness, a disembodied consciousness. All of a sudden in this movie, the Borg were more like an insect colony who actually had a queen. And, I mean, you may have other ideas too, but when I saw this, it just didn't quite go with what I understood the Borg to be. I understood the Borg to be a vast collective with drones, but not a distinct humanoid life form.
Yeah.
I don't know. It went against what I assumed the Borg were.
Yeah. It did kind of catch me off guard too, that they would have a queen. Because like you said, the definition of what we knew as the Borg was that they were all as one, basically, kind of like the mechanicalization of the Founders. Basically like that. Well, there is no single founder that's the head of. They're all one life form, basically.
And they can kind of separate off and be individuals, but they're all exist as one life form. And I figured the Borg were like that. That it was a disembodied consciousness. They had no form.
Yeah.
That it was just they all shared a certain consciousness.
Yeah, just as one consciousness spread out all over the galaxy.
I think in this movie, it basically pointed out the Borg to be more like a cult, where you had one leader manipulating everybody in the form of mind control.
Well, she certainly acted like it, the way she was trying to manipulate Data.
Right. Well, they wrote the Queen, for one thing, is kind of a cult-leading dominatrix.
Yeah.
Who was sort of, trying to manipulate everybody into being part of her own personal collective.
And the way they tried to shoehorn her into best of both worlds, when they made Picard kind of think back, and she was there, it's like, well, I hate when they do that. I hate when they try to when they revisionist history. When they try to go back and say, well, there was something you didn't know about it then, just to justify her being there now. And it's like, well, no, what you're doing is you're trying to rewrite canon.
As you pointed out, you can kind of take the beginning of Emissary, Deep Space Nine, and seamlessly integrate it in with the Battle of Wolf 359 if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, but it doesn't change anything.
Right. It's just it's another character involved. You knew there were people involved in that battle, so having Cisco there makes some sense. You can kind of integrate that issue into what we didn't see happen in that battle.
Yeah.
But with this one, it's kind of hard to integrate Locutus and the Borg Queen as being part of the same era.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you the impression the Borg Queen was present during the Best of Both World events too.
Yeah. But
And
if that was true, Data would have noticed because he was linked to
right, and
Picard.
he had said that the Borg had commands, and
That's right.
it was more like a consciousness. When he linked to Locutus in the end of Best of Both Worlds, he would have indicated the presence of a distinct entity.
Yeah.
Which he did not. So there's a massive discontinuity with the Borg right there.
Yeah.
So essentially, at the end of the day, this is just my theory, the Borg in First Contact are not per se related to the Borg we saw in Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah.
They're very different, that their intentions are different. And, I know I may be driving a stake in the ground, but they do seem more like zombies to me. They just do. I don't know why it is. They just seem like horror zombies.
Yeah.
The way they move, where they act. They seem less android-like to me. I mean, I know that may be controversial to some, even to you, but that's the way I see them. They're just not the same Borg.
Yeah.
They're led by a queen. So okay, enough about the Borg. We get the point. So one thing that's interesting about, we introduced all these new starships in this.
Mm.
And remember in the battle of Sector 001, I guess they call it, so this is the Borg coming to Earth. They're going to friggin' mess up Earth. So anyway, I kind of, when I saw that scene, I figured I'm going to see all these old Miranda classes. You know how they did in Next Gen, just throwing these Miranda classes at it? Or these Excelsior class ships? No, you see all these new little starships flying around.
Yeah.
So, in my 16-year-old mind in those days, you know what I was actually thinking? I was thinking, oh, Playmates, toys. I was thinking this is going to be a big toy parade. We never actually saw toys of those ships.
Yeah.
I wish we had, because some of them were pretty interesting. We had like the Norway class, the Steamrunner class, the Akira class. There was a little one, like a small, like a Defiant-looking ship. And by this time, Worf was over on Deep Space Nine, and so the contrivance to getting him to appear in this movie was to have him come at the Defiant, at the Borg with the Defiant. Which kind of brings the Defiant full circle, though, doesn't it? Because that's what it was made for. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No. I go right ahead.
Yeah, the Defiant was made to attack the Borg. So now we actually see it doing what it was built to do. And it didn't do so well. it kind of had to be morphed off. But
yeah.
Okay. So we see that connection to Deep Space Nine. So Worf comes on the ship, and now he's, I guess, back home, sort of. So this little Borg sphere, I guess this establishes the Borg have all these different shaped ships. I always thought they were cubes or whatever, but anyway, and whatever that was in Descent. So now we have this Borg sphere that flies into some sort of temporal vortex.
Yeah.
And when they come out, the Enterprise is caught up in the eddy of it.
Isn't there like a plot hole right there already? I mean, if going back in time was the goal of the Borg to begin with, why didn't they just send the whole damn cube back in time instead of sending a facet of it? When they thought they were going to lose. I mean, it's like first of all, the Enterprise getting there from the neutral zone in like 5 seconds was really ridiculous because if it takes a long time for a communication signal to go to Earth from where the Enterprise E was, then it shouldn't have taken them just a matter of minutes to get there in time to save the Defiant.
Like we got these giant engines on here and that huge double-decker warp core. That ship going 29 or something.
That thing must be like using J.J. Abrams's warp system or something.
Right. Well, either that or, maybe it's using, whatever they're using now over at Discovery. They're using the Spore thing, and they're just traveling from one place to the other. But that's a whole other story. I don't even know where any of that fits anymore, but I'm just saying that it was like a warp 40 something seeming thing where they got there quickly.
Something like that, yeah.
So they had this ship, and so it went back in time, and when it emerged, the Enterprise was caught in this eddy, and all of a sudden, the planet Earth was planet Borg. So they changed history. So the Borg had assimilated Earth or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the eddy's still there. So, they were under orders to not do this, but they decided to use the temporal eddy to go back in time where the Borg had gone. And, and that brings me to Data. In the first movie, in the Generations that they did, he could not deal with his emotion chip well. Now he seemed to have the ability to turn it on and off like a switch. Which I don't know if that's something he adapted to or something they did. I don't know. It just seemed like he could just kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like wondering why he would want to be able to do that.
It was weird. It was almost like they were trying to rewrite what they did in Generations and rewrite the next generation.
Well, maybe it was because, having Data with emotions was probably too much like what Gene didn't want to have happen with the characters. He wanted Data to become so close to being human, but not quite there, you know what I'm saying? And that was supposed to be the definition of Data. As, we would always wish that he would be human, but he'd never actually get there.
Even with
giving
emotions,
him emotions,
he's not human.
Yeah, I mean, giving him emotions sort of made him more human in sort of the way he would be portrayed by Brent Spiner, because, how can we really tell, except for the makeup, that he wasn't really human?
I don't mean to seem envious, but sometimes I wish they'd hire Meteorite on that show.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot.
I hate to say this, but sometimes I feel like, why do you keep making these things? But anyway, I don't want to turn this into a complaint fest here. I'm just saying, I wish you and I were over there writing at those times. But anyway, so I wish a lot of people were that I know who could do better. Stewart over there at Trek Yards. Yeah, I wish you were over there. Thank you. But anyway, so anybody, I would love to see that. But anyway, so what happened was they went back in time, and it was the day, it was a week before whatever First Contact, when the first warp jump took place. And obviously it was at the end of the Third World War, which you've talked about. And I think, didn't we mention the statistics being a little bit off?
Yeah, way off.
Spock had mentioned one in TOS, and then they mentioned a very different one in this one.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the precise numbers, but I know they were quite different.
Yeah.
Wasn't the one that Riker had quite a bit more?
Yeah, I forget the number offhand now, but it was it was like millions and millions more than what Spock had said had died during World War III, but...
And like I said, it gave some more background on that. So anyway, so they landed in Montana, where apparently Zefram Cochrane and his assistant, a woman named Lily, who was played by Alfre Woodard, who I love generally when I see her in, except the Borg all of a sudden attack Earth, and they go to the warp ship, which is apparently called the Phoenix. And, they have to beam down and try to repair the damage. And basically, as Crusher pointed out, violating the Prime Directive in doing so. So basically, then Troy goes off and ends up getting terribly drunk in doing so, and meets up with Zefram Cochrane. And the reason I say that in quotes, and I wanted to mention this, we've talked about this a lot in our little after shows. Okay, let me get my facts accurate here about what the situation is. In the season 2 episode of TOS, we meet up with Zefram Cochrane, who at that point, using the old kind of TOS-y sort of language, we meet Zefram Cochrane, who is basically the inventor of the space warp. I think was the word they used for it.
Yeah.
How TOS was these terms. So anyway, and in the original show, he was played by a man named Glenn Corbett, who unfortunately had died a few years prior to making a First Contact. So even if they had wanted to cast Glenn Corbett in the role, he was dead. You can't cast a ghost. Yeah. So they cast an actor who I, too, had a lot of respect for at that time, still do, who had actually been in Star Trek, if you remember.
Yeah, he played aliens.
Yeah, and also One Humanoid. And that was, oh my goodness, how could I forget? James Cromwell.
Cromwell, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why I forgot his name. Now, James Cromwell is a very capable actor, but I'll just say this right off the top and we get into it. The way he was portrayed in Metamorphosis versus the way James Cromwell portrayed him, it was hard for me to believe that whoever James Cromwell was playing would ever have had the facility or the wisdom to come up with a technology that would completely alter the fabric of Earth for the next 100 or 200 years.
Hmm.
I just didn't see it in the character.
Yeah, you seem more like a biker clown or something like that,
I guess, yeah, if you want to look at it that way, biker clown, kind of. To be
drunk
honest,
all the time. I mean,
I'm gonna bring this into it. He seemed more like Han Solo
yeah, in a way, yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Even more of a scoundrel acting than even Han Solo was, I think.
Right. I mean, it's more like a Star Wars character, more like somebody who was just kind of out for their own interests. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm all over the place with this movie, but I mean, I haven't really seen it as much as some of the others. I will say that. And I'm just going to say that right off the top. I've seen Generations, Star Trek 4. Realistically, I would say a dozen to about 20 times. Not a million times. Nobody's seen anything a million times.
Yeah.
People say that, but really, it's like 15, 20 times. In its long history, I've maybe seen For First Comet like 3 or 4 times. I really haven't watched much of it, but I remember it, and that's counting the theater. So maybe 4 or 5 counting the theater. So, because I went to the theater to see it. So, and the VHS that I had, I watched that once or twice, and then the DVD maybe. I haven't seen the Blu-ray copy yet, but anyway, so yeah, I don't know. There was a scene where they were actually on the Phoenix going into space, about to make this warp jump. And one of the themes of the movie, in addition to the issue with the Borg, was that everybody is talking to Zefram Cochrane about how there were universities named after him, how there were college courses named after him. And he's trying to throw everybody off. He doesn't like the adoration at all. Even he doesn't understand why he's a subject of adoration. I mean, I gotta be honest with you. There was a point in the movie where I have expected him to say, "I'm not Zefram Cochrane, leave me alone, you got the wrong guy." Would have made more sense if that had been, "I'm not Zefram Cochrane, you just found the wrong guy. I'm another Zefram Cochrane. That guy's over there. I'm the other Zefram Cochrane. He's the one who invented this ship. Go talk to him." But no, he's the guy who didn't understand why they were adoring him, because he didn't have any nobility about inventing this warp ship. He just wanted to get money and prestige.
Yeah.
Which was kind of weird for me, because I don't know. I
mean, the idea of him wanting money and prestige, isn't all that kind of gone and lost after World War III? I mean, money and, I mean, because we get the idea at the end of World War III that pretty much everything that made civilization on Earth pretty much collapsed, including the economic system that was in place. So, I mean, what did he really hope to gain monetarily from creating this?
Well, when Lily was on the Enterprise E, she asked Picard how much the ship cost. So my thinking is this: yeah, that probably was all gone, but they were probably still thinking in the old ways.
Yeah.
They were probably still thinking in old terms, like we're all going to bring that back. It didn't happen, but they were probably thinking that that's the way the world's going to end up in the end. Because these are people, you got to figure, the Lily character might have been born right around now, 2019.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Zefram Cochrane, maybe in the early 2100s. So they remembered a time where we had this kind of life. So, maybe they were still thinking in those terms. They'd been a war, but they were still thinking in those kind of ways.
Yeah.
And, that's how I gathered it. But I don't know. It just, if this guy was such a big deal, I didn't understand why they had to bring him down to this grungy character.
Yeah.
But, that seemed to be the whole thing at the time, wasn't it? What was the word they would use for it? Keeping it real. Everybody wanted to be basically Oscar the Grouch at that time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not a value to, but everybody kind of wanted to be kind of gross and crass. They felt that was what reality was. So the whole thing was to make Zefram Cochrane unheroic. And they certainly did a good job of doing that.
Yeah.
If that was the intent. So, anyway, so what happened is that they, Picard. Okay. Now, we established in the 4th season of TNG that he had gone back to Earth to deal with the issues he'd had with the Borg. But you wouldn't have known it in this movie because he was willing to destroy the Enterprise at one point, even to Worf's concern, just to stop the Borg.
Yeah.
He was that set against it. And you mentioned something that this was actually a holdover from an episode they didn't actually produce, but an idea they had back in the early years of TNG.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been something they would have had. They would have made for season 4 of TNG. Instead, they went and did that other episode with when they meet that look. What's it? What I'm trying to think of the Borgs and that what the name Hugh. Yeah.
Yes,
instead, they created that story about Hugh instead. But I think originally what they were going to do is they wanted to do something like First Contact, but not with the time travel element in it, but with Picard dealing with the aftermath of dealing with the Borg after, so many months. And it's still fresh in his mind, and he's still got, resentment and anger and humiliation and all that going on. But they also added in this movie that Picard seems to still have some kind of connection with the hive mind where he can actually.
Yes, that was also a part of
their thoughts, and we never knew that at the rest of the TV show, because whenever they encountered the Borg, he had no indication that he could actually hear anything from the people. So, so here we learn that he still has that. So I mean, it was a little bit off kilter, a little bit, with Picard. In more ways than one. I mean, on the fact that he was still dealing with stuff that we was led to believe that he had already overcame, and then we find out, how he's, now he's got this whole other personality of like Ahab or something. These like and all this revenge.
I always know that I always want to try to be positive about this, but I remember when First Contact came out, for the longest time, I was referring it to Star Trek First Blood. I really was. And when I saw it, that's how I referred to it for years, because basically they essentially turned Picard into a combination of Ahab and Rambo.
Yeah.
And which was affirmed with a holodeck scene that is famous or infamous for whatever purpose. He's trying to lure Lily, who is helping him defeat the Borg, and everyone will figure out that his characterization is going all back asswards. They go into the holodeck into this, I guess it's Dixon Hill, right?
Yeah.
It's a Dixon Hill program, which evidently he harvested from the Enterprise D, so unless this is part of Federation stuff, I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, he went into the Dixon Hill program, and the Borg come in. So Picard asked for the holodeck safeties off. Now, you got to figure, in the Star Trek universe, there's all these technologies that could be used, multiplicity weapons that could adapt. So Picard takes out a machine gun and basically takes out a bunch of Borg with it. A physical weapon. Thinking the Borg would not be able to adapt to it somehow.
Yeah, that was struck me kind of odd that they wouldn't have some way to repel that,
Yeah, and then just Picard sitting there.
Yeah.
Come on, really? Please.
He was so out of character in this movie that it was like the whole character of Picard was completely out of step with what where we came from with this man.
Yeah, they like I said, you were talking about them having inconsistent. That was a major inconsistency. Again, really not Picard per se.
Yeah,
it was Patrick Stewart for sure, but it was like a multiverse version or something.
Yeah,
almost like there was a mirror Picard, like a mirror universe Picard.
Yeah, like we were in an alternate reality of prime timeline. Where
Picard and the Terran Empire could have been that, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just.
I mean, you got a whole different Enterprise, and you have a different personality with Picard, and you got different looking Borg, and you got, all these things that just don't seem to match with the TV show that we all watch for 7-8 years. It's like.
So basically, we have the Borg Queen, and the Borg Queen is trying to get Picard back into it, and you can see that she kind of controls him. We've talked about this, but she tries to get to Data by offering him some rudimentary human skin, which he pretends, I guess, to get seduced by.
Yeah, and where did she get the skin? They never even explained that.
No. And which brings us to the only humor in the film. The Borg Queen to me. To be honest, I wasn't really amused by Troy getting drunk. I just found it obnoxious. I think it was
Yeah, that was supposed to be funny, but I wasn't really laughing.
no, it's so out of character for Troy too, and then more out of character.
Yeah.
Because
I don't laugh at drunk scenes in movies at all. I mean,
yeah, I mean, some people find some amusement in that, but I mean, I wasn't, moralizing or anything. But I watched it, I said, "Nah,
no, I've seen comedies where people act drunk, and it always looks like they're acting drunk. They're not really drunk; they're acting drunk, and it's never funny.
Like it's an affectation, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen drunk people, and believe me, they don't act anything like that. It's just,
right, and Rita Searles was playing an obvious comedy drunk, and I got the fact, but it kind of blew the whole fantasy to me. And I just, yeah. And then Zefram Cochrane dancing around to a jukebox again, supposedly drunkenly. I thought, just get him off the screen, please.
He's almost becoming like Jar Jar Binks.
Exactly. He's becoming a Jar Jar Binks character in this movie. Like, you just shove off the inventor of the whole Star Trek universe away.
Yeah, I mean, they demoralize this character to the level of Jar Jar Binks here almost in this movie.
Right, and they got an actor who's very capable to play this part, and they make him into a clown.
They could have made him play the part in the way they did it in TOS, and
James Cromwell could have acted that role to pieces.
Yes, he could have.
He's capable. He's one of the finest guys out there, but instead they turned him into a circus clown.
Yeah,
and it's just
that's really Jonathan Frakes and who the other guy that wrote that. That was their play on that, And even though a lot of people say, "Oh, that was his Frakes' first directorial debut," and he did well at it. I differ with that. I think maybe he did in some way, but in a lot of ways in that movie he kind of missed the mark, and he kind of created his own thing. Basically, he didn't really go back and look at canon to be able to establish what some of these characters should be.
So
I'm surprised he screwed up the way he did with Picard. I mean, that's I
mean, he worked with the guy for 7 years.
Yeah, he should have known.
Like I said, it wasn't Jonathan Frakes wasn't the only driving force behind it. There were other people, so I don't know who influenced him or what say he had in things. I wasn't there, so I don't know. Yeah. But so yeah. So the only thing I found sort of humorous was when they kill the Borg Queen in the end, and Picard asked Data, "How long were you tempted by her?" And he gave a very Data answer. I found that a little amusing because Data answers always amusing to me somehow.
Yeah.
Just this little innocence that he always has about it. That seemed like the old Data to me anyway.
Yeah.
Because in Generations, you begin, and you see this in the next movie more, but we'll get into that the next time, is that they're in the movie, they're trying to turn Data into a catchphrase machine, I noticed. There tends to be a tendency to make him into a catchphrase guy. Unfortunately, I don't know how you feel about it, but the two catchphrases in Generations and this one involve colorful metaphors. But they were catchphrases. So, they're kind of trying to make him into a catchphrasey character. I don't know if Brent Spiner came up with that or if that's what they were writing. But they were kind of making Data into more of a catchphrasey guy. So, which I never saw him as, but, seeing Data just being Data, again, was kind of nice in the end. So, okay, so they restore the timeline. Now, I don't mean to go back into another Star Trek series again, but not quite. They destroy the Borg, and the ship crashes on Earth, I guess, because in Enterprise's time, they find some remains up in the polar ice caps.
Yeah. And
the Borg show up in the 22nd century when they should not have shown up at all.
Yeah.
But, so I guess Picard kind of meddled a little bit with the timeline unintentionally, I guess without a choice. And Zefram Cochrane somehow knew him, but somehow didn't say anything. I guess Zefram Cochrane respected temporal protocol a lot. I mean, he could have totally gone to as little as up the government and said, "We have these helping people of the future," but he didn't. He's got that much going for him. I mean, they totally let him know he was from the future. They totally let him know his timeline. Unless Zefram Cochrane thought they were BSing him. I don't know, but they gave him all this information, and he didn't really fly with it. I don't know. I mean, maybe Zefram Cochrane had this idea that, well, they're from the future, so yeah, I got to shut up because I need to create this future. So basically, again, an Enterprise reference. In the end of this, we see the Vulcans come to Earth, and Zefram Cochrane tried this Vulcan salute, and the next thing you know, he's dancing to his jukebox, and when the Vulcan thinks it's a security problem, it seems. The Vulcan leaps up like, "What's going on?" And he's sitting there drunk dancing again or whatever. I wanted to mention again Enterprise. And they did the Enterprise Mirror Universe saga. They reenacted the scene where Zefram Cochrane shoots the Vulcan and goes into the ship and they all raid it. Which I found kind of bizarre, but
Bizarre, but I thought it was kind of
it was
funny.
kind of funny dramatic take on, like, go and get what you can, you know.
Yeah. I mean, all that they needed to add in that scene was like things flying out the door, you know, like there was
like maybe bulkheads and wires and all the star and rocks and all the Star Trek stuff.
Right down the frame.
Yeah, these big metal pieces with wires on them. Like, they could have really played that up, couldn't they?
Yeah. I mean, I was laughing. I mean, I know it wasn't supposed to be a funny thing, but I thought that scene was funny. I mean, I just,
it was a little bit, shall we say, over the top.
Yeah.
Just for the unexpected. You see the scene in First Contact, and then all of a sudden he shoots him like, "Go grab what you can," and it's like, it's just the absurdist cartoonishness of it all.
Yeah.
Like you figure in the Mirror Universe, maybe he'd betray the Vulcans first, but he shoots them and says, "We'll go get everything." Like a cartoonish outlook. Yeah, that's the alternate Zefram Cochrane.
There was still Mad Maxian back in those days.
Yeah. So, and you made a good point. There was a Mad Maxian thing about the Zefram Cochrane.
Yeah.
Even in this movie, there was a Mad Maxian, which was a post-apocalyptic world, and of course, and I'm sorry, my sarcasm is very, very weak. We have no post-apocalyptic stuff today, do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, my sarcasm is really weak. I'm not good at it. I'm not sarcastic, but it's like, so that was, you couldn't look at that and say, "Who was that original?" So. Okay. As far as the movie itself, is there anything else you want to bring to it? Because I discussed my own thing with it, just what I saw.
Well, there was some things that I didn't like about it, and
well, I mean, anything like, dislike, whatever. Just any of your own little observations about it.
Well, a lot of the observations I had, I had what you had with the thing. I just thought, as I was watching the film, I remember watching it for the first time in the theater, and
I was there too.
And I wasn't trying to be critical of it as it was playing, but some of the continuities with the film just came right up like a big flashlight, and it was right in my face, because, like I watched The Next Generation. I've seen a lot of the episodes repeated over and over again before First Contact even came out. So I really had that nailed down in my mind as to when and, things happen and how things ended up. And, this was like the first movie, Next Generation movie, where they actually took a sidestep from canon and sort of kind of reset it, sort of reinvented it in a way.
You're going to get deep into what my last point is, but go on, because like I said, you're leading right into where I'm going to go in the end of this. But go on.
I mean, it sort of felt like that. So when I watched the film, I was like, I could almost see the way the writer was thinking when he was writing this out. There's two stories taking place in this movie. You got the story on the surface, you got the story on the ship. The story would have worked better if Riker was the one on the ship and Picard was the one on the planet. I think the story would have flowed a lot better that way, where Picard would have been the one trying to convince Cochrane of his importance and what he was destined to do. Because I didn't see that with Riker. And
I wanted to add something really quickly. You mentioned whoever the writer was. The story and the basic screenplay of it amounted down to Brendan Braga, who was doing Voyager at the time, and Ronald Moore, who didn't he work on Battlestar Galactica later?
Yeah, later. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, those were the people who wrote it. So I guess if you want to talk about those things in the movie, you have to place the blame kind of on them.
Yeah.
So they're the people. So anyway, go on.
Yeah. So I think, as far as, that I would have swapped the two characters in the story instead, because it didn't seem to me like Picard really fit with being on the Enterprise, dealing with the Borg, because they had him doing all these weird things that he just seemed out of character doing. And then Riker didn't really seem to have much of a purpose except to just loaf around and laugh at Troy being drunk and, chasing Cochrane around with a phaser and It just seemed like there was really nothing there for Riker to do. I mean, it was like he was just there. And I'm thinking, well, that's more of what Riker does. I mean, he's the one that just does all the running up and down corridors with a phaser or something like that. Let him be on the Enterprise fighting the Borg with Worf, and then let Picard be on the surface trying to talk to Cochrane to explain to him why it is that he has to, this destiny that he has to do this thing. That seems to me like that would have been the better way for the characters to be. And it just seems so weird that they would have these two characters doing the opposite, and it just didn't work that way for me. I felt like it should have been the other way around. Data was another thing about Data. What I didn't like was that the emotion chip, which he got in Generations, now he was able to turn it on and off, and it's like, well, what's the point? He wanted to have emotions the whole show.
That was the framework of Data.
Yeah. Why would he all of a sudden now want to be able to shut that off? For what reason? Why? What possible reason would he need to shut it off for? If he wanted these emotions all along and he wanted to experience the full range of emotions in all these situations, he wouldn't have been so unprepared for what he was experiencing on the Enterprise if he was able to have the emotion chip running all the time. Instead, they made it where he could turn it on and off. And it's like, well, what did you do? He had the thing was off this whole year. It must have been off because he wasn't using it.
I agree.
When he's confronted with the Borg, he's like, and he's all scared and everything. It's like, well, geez, I mean, it's like, well, come on, So then he just, I'm just going to shut it off. And so it's like, well, now he's afraid of the emotions now. So it's like, well, this is not Data. I mean, this is really not what Data is. And then, of course, the Queen uses his ability to turn it on and off as a way to coerce him, as a weapon to bludgeon him to turn against the crew of the Enterprise. And I thought that was a little bit, like, well, now you're turning the whole thing that he wanted into some kind of apocalyptic, goal that he got that now he wishes he never got. It's like, well,
yeah.
I didn't like that.
So, okay, is there any more observations you have?
I didn't like the Enterprise E, the look of it.
Right. Well, we it seems like we've talked a lot about that, but it's been in our after shows you don't see out there.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of Star Trek fans out there that really thought the ship looked cool and all that, and that's fine. I'm just not one of those people that liked it. I think the ship, for one thing, it just looked too flat. If you look at the side profile of it, it reminds me of the word bus. It looks like a bus, like a Greyhound bus when you look at the side profile of the thing. I don't know what it is about the side profile of the ship, but it reminds me of a bus.
Star Trek here.
And then all the ships they made after that were all flat. And what do you call it? Tagpole or?
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, see, it's like a little.
Yeah. They kind of went.
The ocean. It's got this tadpole-y shape.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's the way they're making them now. All the ships are flat.
If Voyager is the guiltiest of that.
Yeah.
Voyager is literally like a little tadpole. All you do is flap those nacelles around and this little tadpole flying to the brook,
Exactly.
Like, I mean, those nacelles when they went up was kind of cool, but could you imagine them flapping like wings?
Yeah.
Nacelles or something. I mean, and first of all, I don't know if this was intentional, but when I first saw these things that swept up, they looked very Klingon.
Yeah, they kind of do.
They had a Klingon / Romulan-y kind of bird look, because Starfleet ships usually are very streamlined.
Yeah,
they're very straight. They can go back like that, but they have straight lines. These were kind of curved, and I always wondered if there was some Klingon designers or something who kind of put that together to make it look a little fiercer.
Well, you see, my impression about the ship Voyager was that the look of the Voyager was unique only to the Intrepid class, but when I see that they borrowed it for the Sovereign class, it seemed like, well, now that design isn't so unique
anymore. There's a resin model where they basically made like a Voyager / Sovereign class ship, and they had a Sovereign class saucer, but they made it totally round. I really think it would work well with a rounder saucer.
Yeah.
And maybe a primary hull that was a little more, that had a little more of a form than a taper.
Yeah.
I thought that would have really worked better. But then again, like I said, I'm not designing these ships. Nobody asked me to design them. That's all she wrote. I mean, I can.
Yeah.
I can just make up designs. You can.
Oh, the only thing I can say is at least they didn't try to redesign something that was already designed, like what they're doing now. With this, try. At least they created something,
Yeah,
unique.
that's a good point
You
because
know.
what they could have done is they could have taken the Enterprise D and mangled it all to bits.
Oh God, yeah, that would have pissed me off. There.
I mean, remember Voyager, that episode where they had this revisionist future and they put all these big giant
guns and everything.
battleship Voyager with like a million torpedo pens that can blow up anything. Where they're trying to make Voyager like villainous. Could you imagine if they just stacked all these friggin' weapons all over the Enterprise D and these giant guns and these? I mean, can you imagine if they had these giant bulkheads and wires sticking out of the wall, all this crazy? They could have really wrecked that. They're like, oh, come on, just let that ship die, and they did. I'm glad they gave the Enterprise D the funeral for what it was, and they didn't. I mean, who knows? They could have made that Dreadnought the first contact ship.
Yeah, they
could
could
have been almost there, not quite that bad. They could have really just poured crap onto that.
Yeah.
They could have said
they could have took some elements of that Dreadnought maybe and put it onto an upgraded Galaxy class. I mean,
yeah, but
not
still, the Galaxy class I kind of see it as for its thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad they did design a totally new ship and didn't wreck the old stuff.
Yeah.
Or they didn't just give him some old bucket.
Yeah.
They could have given some. They could have given him some Enterprise B ship and said, "Well, here's your Enterprise E. Deal with it." They didn't do that. Or they could have given him some exotic ambassador, or that thing from Voyager. Was it the Jaeger class? That Maquis with the Intrepid.
Yeah, with the.
They could have given him one of them.
Kit bash.
I can see Picard like, thanks.
Yeah.
Give me some bond together ship like that. So at least they made a new ship. But I have to say, in terms of the starships, I like the ones in the Borg battle scene were a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Because they had a different look, they had a different shape, and I wish the Enterprise E had been a little more like that, where they're kind of unique shaped.
Yeah.
Rather than just, and even this would have been okay if they'd done some new things with it. But this thing, these tadpole ships, it just is like everything became all stretchy, and I don't know.
Yeah, everything about the ship looks like they took both ends of it and just went, just
like the Excelsior was turned into silly putty, and they just said, let's stretch the nacelles here, let's stretch the saucer here, you got a starship.
Yeah.
So they stretch out an Excelsior class like it was, well, in the next movie we're going to talk about, they have this alien race who are stretching their skin.
Yeah.
Like they put the Enterprise, the Excelsior through one of them and said, stretch it all out, give it a new paint job, and here's your new ship.
Yeah.
And if I understand it, this thing is actually about the size of 3 Excelsiors. Maybe 4. It's long. It's not, I don't think volume-wise it's that big. I haven't counted the windows on it. But there's been estimations of the crew. But the one thing about the Enterprise E, and this goes for every Next Generation film, I know almost nothing about it. The decks have changed movie to movie. I think it had, 24 decks in this movie?
I thought there were 26. I don't know. Maybe I'm off. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, there was another deck system mentioned in another movie, but there were, again, discontinuity. So you mentioned something a little bit earlier about First Contact, if I got it right, about how they were kind of getting into that thing of changing.
That era of going dark with everything.
Well, going dark, but trying to change the continuity a lot.
Yeah, kind of like revisionist thing.
That's how I was going to kind of end this presentation.
Yeah.
To start out with, first of all, with First Contact, looking back at it, it's sort of the beginning of what's happening to Star Trek now, where they're starting to kind of, yes, I dare say, it's almost a reboot. It's a reboot of The Next Generation in a lot of ways. The characters are not quite the same. The ship is obviously not the same. Remember what Guinan was telling Riker in Best of Both Worlds? You tried to kill whatever that was in the Borg ship, not Picard. When I watched that movie, I felt like I'm watching whatever that is on the Enterprise, not Picard. That was like Patrick Stewart playing some cosmic Rambo figure. That's why I called it Star Trek First Blood for 3 or 4 years after that. Because it did... It seemed more like a guy with PTSD, to be honest. That's just the vibe I got. And that wasn't who Picard was. If he had issues like that, they were resolved earlier in the show.
Yeah.
In the drumhead, he distinctly told Admiral Satie, I have completely recovered. He was not fronting. He wasn't making that up. He meant what he said.
Yeah.
He had issues with the Borg, for sure, but he himself had recovered. That guy in First Contact hadn't recovered from anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, the Borg are manipulating him. We didn't know they did that. I mean, if that had been the case, when he was around Hugh and all them, wouldn't that have affected him too?
Exactly.
And it didn't. I mean, he was concerned about what the Borg were going to do and debating an ethical thing, but he wasn't there trying to slash Hugh's head off and break into bits.
Yeah.
When Guinan said you should talk to Hugh, he went down there and spoke to him. The Picard in First Contact would have put Hugh in an airlock and eaten him for lunch. No. As far as I'm concerned, that really wasn't Picard. And we never, even in the other movies, we never saw that guy again, whoever that was. We never saw that guy.
Yeah.
He kind of eventually just became the Picard we knew again. I mean, there were elements that they left in there, but it really wasn't the Next Generation movie at all. It was like a totally different reimagining of it. Now, let me go back to where things were in the beginning. The first thing I read about the movie, which made, as Kirk said about the M5, my red alert in my head go off, is they distinctly said, whether you read this or not, they're trying to make a Star Trek movie for non-Star Trek fans. Now, I mean, at that point, I'm sure when you were younger, you had a different critical aesthetic than you do now. Maybe you were less critical. Maybe you had a different things that bother you about things. I would say that same with me. But by 16, my critical assessment was basically what it would be now. I kind of mutated into my adult thing of it. So when I heard about them making a movie for non-Star Trek fans, I kind of had an idea it wasn't really going to be much of a Star Trek film in terms of that it wasn't going to be Star Trek-y. Now, if you look back at the films of the mid-90s, I always make kind of a joke to myself. Everything seemed to have the word conflict or death or, no pun intended, Terminator in the title.
Yeah.
Not the Terminator movies, but I'm just saying that there was something about terminate or conflict or struggle. There was always some...
Make it realistic.
More
more contemporary, more realistic in a way.
Everything got kind of Klingon. When I say Klingon, you know how Klingons add the word death and pain to virtually everything in their culture?
Yeah.
Everything got kind of Klingon. It's like, let's make a real, authentic pain movie. Everything you expect them to come out like a pain stick or something. They were getting into that. So I'm surprised they didn't call the movie Star Trek First Contact Pain, Doom, Disaster, Conflict.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're just putting all these expletives on everything to make it. So, okay. So I said, okay, well, And at that point, Deep Space Nine was in a place where they were starting this Dominion War thing and everything. And the Klingons, they were bringing them out of the Kid Marcos. They were an enemy again, which I really didn't like. And I'm going to say this. That got me, and this is where you and I met, where I got so fed up, I wanted to write my own Star Trek series to counter that. Which to this day has not happened. But trust me out there, people, I haven't forgotten it. Okay? In this age, I have not forgotten it. But that's got me into that mindset where I wanted to actually write, not a fanfic, my own series. Like a TV series. And, you were there. We dealt with it together, and we're still kind of halfway dealing with it, and I've still got it kind of floating around. Maybe it's still needed, but it certainly felt like then Star Trek needed. Like we said, it was sort of on a slow decline at that point, out of Gene Roddenberry. It was starting to get less about the human condition and more about, let's make it less Star Trek-y, which is what you implied.
Yeah.
So, okay. The preview came out. I'm sure you saw it. And, remember you said about Star Trek V, the preview kind of made you roll your eyes on that one?
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be stupid. I looked at First Cut, I said, this is not going to be stupid. But I said, they're making a shoot-'em-up film. That's what I thought. And, a lot of the guys who worked with my dad at that time, kind of jockey people, they were all rooting, it's Star Trek First Cut, they're going to blow up the Borg. And I was like Guinan when she met Q. I'm like, I was just nonplussed.
Yeah.
And like I said, the Bill Cosby quote that I make up, that I constantly refer to, I felt, I didn't really think in that way then, but thinking, they're putting something on a trash can lid here. Okay? So I went to the movie, and, obviously I didn't go in enthused. But I said, I'm going to give this a chance. I thought it was going to be a total shoot-'em-up. It wasn't. It wasn't actually a total shoot-'em-up. But I left there feeling sour. And I really did leave there feeling a little sour. And I thought to myself, if Star Trek keeps going this way, it's not going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
It went that way because the movie was incredibly commercially successful.
And, I have to say, though, that it didn't get there overnight. It got there slowly under the watchful eyes of Ron Moore and Rick Berman, who was at the control. And these were people who often opposed Roddenberry's way of doing things with Star Trek, and they wanted to make things a little more action oriented, even during Next Generation. And Roddenberry just said, no, this is the way I'm doing this. This is my show, and they didn't like that. That's why when they did Deep Space Nine, they kind of got their way with it, and they made it the way they wanted to do Star Trek. And I think when that series started, that was really the beginning of things starting to go down. They couldn't really touch Next Generation yet until they did First Contact, but that was the second step, to making things a little less Star Trek in a way. So it began with that. Voyager, for what it was, I mean, it still held to some of the ideals and stuff of what Roddenberry had, and it did episodes that weren't always about, fighting and destruction and stuff, and it had characters that dealt with the human condition. So Voyager really kind of held on to it a little bit, but it was starting there. Then it was very gradual. I mean, when Deep Space Nine, I could see where they were going with it in future, makes of the movies and TV shows, and really it was. When First Contact came out, it was like, okay, this wasn't a surprise to me that it was getting that, by that. But
you're absolutely right, and I have to admit, I thought the same thing. Although you seem to be looking at it in a very logical way. Unfortunately, at the time, I mean, neither of us are Vulcan here, okay?
Yeah.
So we cannot bury our emotions all the time. Maybe some people are better at it. Yeah. I wasn't at that time. Again, a lot of the things that happened during Generations were still a factor. I was still very much a lone wolf in the world, and not just in the teenager sense. That I was starting to kind of realize that I wasn't quite like other people around me in a very specific and not abstract kind of way.
Yeah.
And what the Next Generation provided through data, through its storylines, were really helpful with that. So at 16, when you're trying to establish, because many children have this issue in their lives, where they feel like they don't belong, but they grow into the world. I wasn't growing into it. Now I know why, but I wasn't growing into it well. And First Contact was the first time in my life Star Trek put me out of league with it. It took me out of context with it. And I'm like, can I be a Star Trek fan now? This is the way it's going to be. Can I be a fan of this show? That's a hard thing to say. That was the first time. And, even to this day with this Discovery and this reboot thing, I never had that happen to me again.
Yeah.
I never had something take me so far out of it. Because remember, with these things, as Abrams, it took years for that to kind of happen,
Yeah.
First Contact, we had just had a couple years before, Next Generation and all this. And now all of a sudden, they changed it.
Yeah.
So here's the weird thing. At that point, I said, well, I still love Star Trek, but I'll take solace, because Deep Space Nine to me was going down the pits at that point, too. It was kind of getting more into that Klingon thing. I was watching it, but kind of like, can we get this over with? But with Voyager, it's like, I'm going to go over to that. They're kind of showing signs of improving and getting better, and they're showing more stuff. You could kind of see they were going in a better place at that point. They had their flaws, I'll agree, but they were starting to get out of them and starting to move on, and I was getting pretty happy with Voyager, so it was the first time I really questioned my interest in Star Trek when I said, are they going to make it for people who don't like people like me? Because I'm going to tell you, people who like First Contact did not like Trek fans. Not people I knew. They were people who thought of Trek fans as geeks, people who would beat up Star Trek fans. It was a jockey audience. That when I went there, it was all baseball cap and team shirts. I didn't see any Star Trek people at all. It was a totally non-Star Trek experience. I heard a lot of hooting and hollering and that was another thing. When I went there, I heard a lot of hooting and hollering at the battle scenes. I never saw that before. When you went, were there more Trekkie type people there, or the Casimir or whoever?
I didn't go to see that on opening night. I did go like a week later, and the Casimir was there, with their piece of the bridge and stuff like that. And some of them went to watch it for the third or fourth time, whatever. And they were interested to see how I was going to react to the film. They were a bit surprised when I walked out of there, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulder like, it is what it is. I wasn't really like blown away or anything by it.
I don't remember. Maybe you don't, but You know, and we knew each other. Why didn't we go to that together? You and I. That's weird. We knew
I
each
don't
other.
know.
Go.
I think. Well, I mean, you were. I think you were. I mean, you were younger. You know, you're. You know, maybe you was doing stuff with your parents or something at the
Well,
time.
no, but whatever reason, I don't know why we didn't go together because we kind of planning to. If I remember, we
Hmm.
were planning on going to that together. That would
Yeah.
have been an interesting thing. It might have been more interesting because, you know, I think with my mother as being kind of a Star Trek fan, and my father kind of being a guy who watching from the wings, he was like, meh, whatever. But, you know, with my mother, I don't really remember her reaction. I just remember she loved Alfre Woodard as an actress. There was a movie out around that time called, Down in the Delta or something. Or it was out. And I will say this. Just for a character who was there to remind us that Picard was out of character, I appreciate her in this movie. Because she was
Yeah.
telling the audience, hey, this guy isn't acting right.
Yeah.
You know, just so you were reminded there was something screwed up about it. So I appreciated her being that, yeah, this isn't right for Star Trek. It was just kind of her
Yeah.
translation of it.
I kind of wish maybe it would have been something for Guinan that would have been maybe that could
Yeah,
have
she
been.
kind of acted as the tougher 21st century Guinan in that movie.
Yeah.
Kind
And
of
I'm kind of wondering if maybe that role was originally written for her.
Yeah, because she wasn't in that. She was in another movie at that time. I don't remember what it was, but I think maybe was doing Boys on the Side or whatever at that point. So yeah, she wasn't in this.
Yeah.
Because she had that movie career that was going really big at that
So
time.
maybe they had to invent another character.
Because I mean, Guinan could have easily been the one to tell Picard you're going off the rails.
Yeah.
But instead, they got a character from that time who didn't even know the context of this, being like, "I can see this, and I haven't even read Moby Dick." You know? She totally trolled Picard in this movie, pretty much.
Yeah.
She's like, she knew who Ahab was, she understood it, and you could see. I mean, if she's working on the Phoenix, she's no idiot.
Yeah.
So you know, and she's probably seen things that Picard would never imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, if she lived during the post-atomic horror, she lived in probably a kind of a semi-Hiroshima environment.
Yeah.
So, you know, she'd been through some really hard things. So she's like, yeah, I get what this guy's going on about. And there was a scene I just remember where Picard just throws this up Star Wars coming in, Kylo Ren blows up all these little, and you know, I noticed, remember how on the Enterprise D they had those big kind of brass ships on the wall, these half ship things?
Yeah.
What they did with this one is they took the AMT models, the little 1/25th scale models, painted them all up gold and just put them on this display stand.
Yeah, a glass thing, yeah.
They were just the AMT models. I knew them the minute I saw them.
Yeah.
And then when he blows up, they all fly, and the nacelles are flying off like they're made out of plastic. And I know it's supposed to be funny at all. I know it's supposed to be Picard losing it. But then, of course, even though it's not a humorous remark, she's like, "You broke your little ships."
Yeah.
I just thought, well, they were their little models.
He broke his little models.
Falling apart like they're these little.
Yeah.
They're not. Those big ones were brass. You could see they were big metal ones. At least they looked metal on the original Enterprise D. These are little chintzy plastic models.
Yeah.
This is like the low budget Enterprise display.
Yeah.
You know, I think there was there an Enterprise C on there?
I don't know. I'd have to look at the film again to see.
There were AMT, the Enterprise D was the 1/25th AMT model.
Yeah.
Because I could see the nacelle spinning around on it.
Yeah.
Because whenever that nacelle would come up, it would spin around like that. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So this is they just spray these models up. That's all. So I found that it's like it's one of those not funny scenes where it had this ironic humor in a way to me. It's like, oh, he just knocked on a bunch of little models. You know, I mean, if it had been brass and they'd come down, they'd been a thud and the floor had broken, it would have been more dramatic. But the little models are sitting there being plastic. I thought, you know, that kind of it blew the fantasy. You know, you're supposed to see Picard breaking down here and oh my gosh, he's in trouble. But you see these little ding, 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 plastic ships falling. I was like, oh no, they kind of blew that scene. You know.
Yeah.
It kind of, if that had been metal and you heard the floor crack, that would have been so dramatic.
Yeah.
But it's like you saw these little plastic things flying around. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
I just couldn't help it. Almost like, you know, it's like you're supposed to feel something for Picard in this scene, but instead I see, oh, she's like, you broke your little ships, and that's all it was. You saw little ships breaking around.
Yeah.
And plus the fact too, for Patrick Stewart, really, it was kind of like a little childish temper tantrum, like,
yeah.
You know, it wasn't really like any kind of big dramatic thing. I just said, I'm not buying it. I couldn't buy into this thing. I couldn't buy into this Picard. I was having trouble with this Enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to turn him into Mel Gibson's, like Lethal Weapon.
Like I said, this Rambo-y thing they were doing, and
It's not him. It's just not. That's not the way Picard
it's
would
an
have.
action hero-y thing.
Especially when you have a ship's counselor that can read your thoughts. She would have known if there was anything like that.
And where was Troy during all this?
Yeah, I mean,
he
would have gotten the help that he needed way before that. It's like I said, it was all out of step. The whole movie was all out of step with the continuity of everything we've seen, and that's why I say that this movie felt like it was completely, detached from Prime timeline. It just felt like it was making its own thing. It was becoming something different, like you said, like a different kind of Star Trek for people who weren't Star Trek fans.
Right, and it had been advertised that way.
Yeah.
So, and here's the weird thing about it too. When I saw that movie, I was thinking in my head at the time, well, okay, this is an experiment they're going to try, and then they'll move on. And they kind of did at the time.
Yeah.
Little did I know that would be a template.
Well, it did so well in the box office that it was inevitable that.
So when Enterprise went off the air, I didn't know it would come back more First Contact style.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. You look at the way the Kelvin timeline movies are, and even into Discovery now. And I just wanted to announce it. At this particular point, I have seen much of the first season of Star Trek Discovery. And I will tell you, the root of those is not The Next Generation or TOS, it's First Contact. I will tell you that much. That's what I have seen. The roots of it are there. And like I said, they tried to sneak some of that Star Trek humanity into there by trying to inspire Zefram Cochrane to realize what an important figure he was. The only problem is, why would he need to know that? Why would Zefram Cochrane be so detached from who he was that he would need somebody from the future to remind him?
He did it by himself the first time without anybody there to encourage him to do it, right? So why would he?
Well, allegedly it would happen after that, but even still, I can't imagine this was the guy that invented warp drive.
Yeah.
He didn't even seem particularly brilliant.
Yeah, he didn't.
I mean, and James Cromwell can play brilliant amazingly. I've seen him in many things. He was in Star Trek on this planet where they were creating super soldiers, who was playing brilliant, conniving, clever. If he plays Zefram Cochrane like that, I'd have been fine.
Yeah.
But they just, like you said, a biker clown.
Yeah.
Like the comic relief in Easy Rider or something. That's just kind of the way he came off.
Essentially, yeah.
Like that hobo biker character.
Yeah.
It's like, that guy invented warp drive.
Yeah.
That guy maybe invented a 4-can beer straw. He didn't seem like a guy who was going to basically change the nature of interstellar travel for the next 200, 300 years. I didn't get that connection.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was James. I think it was the writing. I think it was the way it was written. I think it was the way it was done. And, that was the first movie I watched where I started writing a whole other story in my head. Like, you could totally do this, but not this way.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to have seen that. No disrespect to Alice Krige. I haven't seen her in a lot, but no disrespect to her as an actress. She played very well what they gave her as a Borg queen. But I would have preferred the Borg as more of a kind of aloof, robotic, menacing figure with no humanoid collective consciousness, where the Borg collective was just an existential concept with no physicality.
As they were in Q Who.
Right. That was a lot scarier in a way.
They were, because they were undefeatable. But every time we encountered the Borg after that, there was always something they had to put in with the Borg to make them defeatable.
Again, bringing in the horror element like the ghouls, it's the old, you got to kill the head vampire thing.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing with the Borg queen. If you kill the head vampire, they'll all go.
Yeah.
And that makes the Borg vulnerable and defeatable and not very scary.
Yeah.
Because, all Jimmy had to do was kill the head vampire and the other vampires die with him. I mean,
yeah.
that collective consciousness, you can't really defeat that. You can't fight that as easy.
That's why I say, did the Borg really die at the end, the last episode of Voyager, or is it just one of those things where they're going to pop up?
Vampire.
Yeah. Because she came back anyway, even though they killed her in First Contact. There she is.
Would it be a cliche to suggest in the future we should actually cover the Borg? I know a lot of people do that.
Well, that's going to be like a headache and a half there, Andre, because, we cover the Borg, we're going to run right into walls and inconsistencies and plot holes.
Like I said, it started to find by inconsistency, then the Borg are just another ride on the park, because the Borg are kind of being written as they went along. They're improvised.
I mean, at least they made the Klingons consistent to some way. I mean,
adding pain and death to everything, basically.
Yeah. I mean, and the Romulans. I mean, but why the Borg? Why do they tinker with that so much? You know, that they made it so like they're not really that much of a threat anymore now.
Maybe it scared the writers. Maybe they looked at the Borg and they thought, if they can't defeat them, how do we write something you can't defeat?
Yeah.
Maybe
Hey, it's a challenge. That's just what makes writers right.
Unless maybe they just had a bad day, and they just didn't know how to write for these characters that weren't defeatable.
And that's like what do you call it, the fire, the trial by fire. If you can't think your way out of this thing as a writer, then you shouldn't be writing science fiction to begin with, because any decent science fiction writer would not have looked at that as a problem, would have looked at it as a challenge to overcome. They would have wrote that story out, and they would have come up with a plausible way to kill the Borg.
And here's the thing: if they wanted to make the Borg have a queen in First Contact, the death of the queen should have been the end of the Borg completely.
Bingo, yeah.
I mean, they were planning on introducing it to Voyager, so all of a sudden the Queen became an assimilatable being.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you can have the Queen go on forever this way. So when she destroyed the Borg Unimatrix in the end, it's like, was that killing the means to make a head vampire?
Yeah.
Or was it? It just, because they had established this thing where the Borg could just be like, they multiplied and they just kind of regenerated all the time and came back. And, I don't know. I mean, in the original plotline, they seem hard to defeat, but it seemed like once you defeated the collective or some element of it, you were done with them.
Yeah.
Where later on it was like, well, they're just kind of more annoying. They just kind of keep coming back and every time they come back. And
the drones were basically the arms and limbs of what the Queen was, essentially.
And then kind of easy to take out of that. So First Contact kind of ruined the Borg in a way. It kind of made them... it kind of reduced them from level 10 to level 1 of the game.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have a challenge anymore. It's like, we'll just kid the head of the Hell Vampire and they'll all go,
Yeah.
So, we'll just take a piece out here, a piece out there, and they'll be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I usually try to be even keel on this. I didn't watch this movie in prep for this, and I don't plan on watching it in the near future. It's what I never go back to be honest.
Yeah. It's not a movie that I watch frequently. And that one, and it's sort of like one of those movies, like if you've seen it, it's like there's really nothing new there to walk away with watching it. You don't like the motion picture, you can watch it, and sometimes you can come up with something new out of it, the story. But with this movie, with First Contact, you watch it, and it's like, well, there's really no depth to the story there. I mean, it's pretty in your face.
Well, even though in the movie, Khan's story was pretty one-dimensional too, there were elements in the Wrath of Khan you could look at and kind of dissect.
Yeah.
Khan wasn't that complex in that movie, I agree. He was pretty one-dimensional there. But if you take everything but Khan aside from it, well, he could have been a very multi-dimensional character, but he wasn't. There were elements like, Kirk and Carol Marcus and the cadet thing and Kirk aging. You could kind of dissect that a little bit. With First Contact, the Next Generation characters, they develop so much depth and so much, richness of character. And what they do is they turn them in the movie into, well, especially Picard, caricatures of what the writers wanted them to be.
Yeah.
The point of Picard was barely even recognizable.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I've heard it over and over again. As a general series, the Next Generation movies did not live up to what the original ones did.
Yeah.
There's probably some truth to that, but I will say this. In a controversial level, there are Next Generation movies I far prefer to First Contact. Generations being among them. And Generations is not the best loved movies, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I know.
But most people say, First Contact was the best. And I'm saying, no, it was symptomatic.
This goes back to that same old thing like Star Trek 2 versus Star Trek The Motion Picture. Now you got Star Trek First Contact versus Star Trek Generations.
The only problem is there's no revision on that.
Really. Depending on where you land on that argument, that really is what kind of Star Trek fan you are. That's the way I see it. If you land on First Contact, then obviously you're the different kind of Star Trek fan that appeals to Discovery and the
reboot concept.
Reboot stuff, yeah. That's
like rebooting the attitudes and the characters of whatever this is.
That's right.
But okay, is there anything more that you wanted to add to this? Because I'm pretty much at my
I'm pretty much done. Yeah.
All right, so it's your turn next week, and you're gonna do Insurrection, I imagine.
Insurrection, yeah.
Okay, really? Let's go. Yeah, I want to get Insurrection. That's where I am. I'm just to let you know how I'm feeling about this. So, because Insurrection, my feelings are a little different. They're not like I'm all the way with it, but we'll talk about that next week. But Insurrection, I get a lot more interesting stuff to say about that because there's definitely going to be some more humor there. So I'm sorry about the lack of humor in this, but thank you to Stuart. Well, we tried, in an ironic way. But I want to say a shout out to Stuart over at Trek Yards, of course, and to all of our friends out there. And we have some ideas about Trek Prime we're going to be using in the future. So we'll keep you updated. And remember, I'm going to keep doing this. Subscribe, click the little bell. And if you're on Facebook, don't just look at the link and like on it. Follow that link, add us, and ring the little bell. Because some people just go on Facebook, they click the little link and like, oh, we're all set. No, click on the link, watch the video. I know we ramble on a bit, but it's a podcast, So if you have some time, watch it, listen to it, and then click the bell. So we're not offering any subscriber treats or anything. We're just trying to get you involved right now. So get in there, enjoy it, and
make some comments if you got any comments.
Yes. Keep the comments coming. We got 2 commenters. Keep the comments coming. No trolling now, but keep the comments coming. Good ones, like I said, but even if they're, real comments. Keep them coming. Involve yourself, ask us questions, and believe me, one of us will answer. Maybe both. So until episode 35, live long and prosper, everybody.
Okay.